It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Jake first noticed something strange. The sun had just dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows across the land he had worked hard to cultivate for years. His farm, nestled on the outskirts of town, was a quiet sanctuary, one that he cherished above all else. But today, something was different. As he rounded the bend of the long dirt road leading to his property, his eyes locked onto an unusual sight. 6 small cottages. Neatly constructed, freshly painted in shades of gray and white, they sat on the edge of his land. Cottages that weren't there yesterday, or the day before, and certainly not when he'd last surveyed the area a few weeks ago. Jake's heart began to race. He slowed his truck, pulling over to the side of the road. His eyes scanned the structures, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The cottages looked pristine, as if they had been built overnight. There were no construction vehicles around, no workers, no signs of activity. Just these buildings standing ominously in the fading light. What the hell? Jake muttered to himself, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel. He got out of the truck and walked toward the cottages, his boots crunching on the gravel as the weight of the situation slowly sank in. Was this some kind of mistake? Maybe they were for someone else? But who? And why were they built on his property? As he drew closer, the unsettling truth began to surface. A "For Rent" sign hung from one of the doors, flapping slightly in the evening breeze. Jake's stomach dropped. No one was supposed to rent anything on his land. No one had permission to build here. No one but him. His mind raced, the realization hitting him like a slap. Someone he knew, had done this. But who? His thoughts immediately jumped to Karen, his neighbor. She'd always been a little too friendly for comfort, always pushing boundaries. But this? This was beyond anything he could have imagined. He stormed toward the nearest cottage, his heart pounding. As he approached, he saw movement inside. Someone walking through the window, pulling back the curtains. His jaw clenched. There was no mistaking it now. Someone was living here, paying rent, as if the land was theirs to lease. "Karen!" Jake shouted, his voice sharp with anger and disbelief. No response. He stepped back, his mind spinning. This wasn't just an oversight or a simple misunderstanding. Someone had taken matters into their own hands, had stolen from him in broad daylight. And Jake knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of something much darker. The truth had only just begun to unravel, and he was about to find out just how far Karen would go to protect the secret she was hiding. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. Jake had known Karen for years, ever since she moved into the property next door just a mile up the road. At first, she seemed harmless enough. A friendly woman in her mid-40s, always eager to chat over the fence, offering unsolicited advice on gardening or commenting on his work. But there was something about her that rubbed Jake the wrong way from the start. She had this unnerving way of insinuating herself into every conversation, as if she were trying to weave herself into the very fabric of his life, without ever truly asking for permission. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, constantly scanning, always looking for opportunities. And it wasn't just the casual neighborly chats that put Jake on edge. Karen had a habit of borrowing things without asking. His tools, his tractor, even his power washer once when she decided her garden needed a cleaning. Every time Jake had confronted her, she'd brush it off with that disarming smile of hers and a casual, "Oh, I thought you wouldn't mind." The smile never reached her eyes. Jake wasn't the type to stir up conflict, but he had learned over the years to keep his distance from Karen. There were rumors that she'd overstepped before, always pushing the limits of what she could get away with. The neighbors whispered that she'd built a deck without permits, and had once tried to extend her property line by illegally cutting down part of a neighboring forest. Each time, she had used charm and persistence to get her way, playing the victim when things started to unravel. Now, with the cottages on his property, Jake knew something had shifted. This wasn't a random misstep. This was Karen making a bold, deliberate move, one that would take more than a casual chat over the fence to fix. But what was her game? Jake remembered the last time he'd seen her, at a neighborhood barbecue a month ago. She'd been the life of the party, laughing loudly, always in the center of attention. But there was an edge to her words. When the conversation drifted toward land and property, Jake had noticed her sudden, intense focus on him. She'd asked too many questions about his plans for the farm. At the time, he'd written it off as casual interest. Now, the pieces clicked into place. Karen didn't just want to be part of the neighborhood. She wanted to control it, and Jake had a sinking feeling in his gut that he was about to become the centerpiece of her next grand scheme. But the question lingered. Why the cottages? Why now? There was more at play here than just a neighbor's overreach. And Jake knew that if he didn't act fast, he might lose everything he'd worked for. Jake's hands were clenched into fists as he slammed the door to his truck shut. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The air smelled of dry grass and the faint hint of burning wood from the nearby forest, but it might as well have been the scent of danger. Something was off, and he could feel it crawling under his skin. He marched toward Karen's house, each step heavy with purpose. The cottages loomed behind him like silent witnesses, their sharp outlines cutting against the darkening sky. His mind raced, calculating the confrontation that was about to unfold. He'd known Karen long enough to realize she'd never admit to wrongdoing. She'd lie, deflect, manipulate, anything to avoid facing the consequences. As he reached her front porch, the door swung open before he could knock. Karen stood there, wearing her usual wide smile, the kind that never seemed to reach her eyes. "Well, well," she said, her voice smooth but with a hint of mockery. "Jake, what brings you by so late?" Jake's eyes narrowed. "Cut the crap, Karen. You know exactly why I'm here." She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "I'm not sure I do. What's going on?" His voice hardened. "You built cottages on my property. 6 of them. And you've been renting them out, without my permission, without even asking." Karen's smile faltered for the briefest second before it was back in place. "Oh, that." She waved her hand dismissively as if it were no big deal. "Jake, please, it's not like you've been using that land. I thought you wouldn't mind. It's just a small project. They're nice little rentals, and you weren't doing anything with that part of the property anyway. I figured—" "No," Jake snapped, cutting her off. "You figured wrong. That land is mine, and I didn't give you permission to build anything on it. You can't just decide to put up cottages and charge people to stay on my land without saying a word to me." Karen took a step forward, her eyes hardening, her smile now replaced by something more dangerous, something calculating. "Jake, I don't think you understand. I've been doing you a favor. You've been sitting on all that unused land, and it's just sitting there, costing you money. These cottages are bringing in revenue for both of us. It's a win-win situation." Jake's blood ran cold. "Revenue? For both of us?" He couldn't believe his ears. "You think I'd want to split profits with you after you've stolen from me?" Karen's lips curled into a thin, almost pitying smile. "Jake, you're being unreasonable. You're acting like I'm some kind of criminal. I've put in the work, I've taken the risk, and I've made something of it. I did what you couldn't, and you're still too stubborn to see that. Maybe this is your fault." The words hit him like a slap. "My fault?" Jake repeated, his voice rising. "You've got some nerve, Karen. This is my property, and you've stolen from me. I didn't do anything to deserve this." Karen shrugged, her tone shifting to something colder, more rehearsed. "I'm just trying to help. If you want to be mad, go ahead. But it's not going to change anything. The cottages are already rented. People are already living there. And honestly, I'm getting sick of you always being so difficult. Maybe you should learn to share once in a while." Jake's mind was spinning, and the walls seemed to close in around him. This wasn't just about cottages anymore. Karen was playing a dangerous game, and he could feel it in his gut. Her words were too calm, too practiced. She wasn't going to back down. This was more than a dispute. It was a battle for control, and she wasn't about to let it go easily. He took a step forward, his voice low but firm. "You're not getting away with this. I'll take this to court. I'll fight you on this, Karen. You'll regret it." She didn't flinch. "You can try, but in the end, I think you'll find that I've already won." The door slammed shut in his face before he could respond. Jake stood there for a moment, his fists still clenched. He knew she wasn't done. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. And something told him, deep down, that Karen wasn't playing by the same rules anymore. The following week was a blur. Jake barely slept, his mind racing with anger and disbelief. He couldn't shake the image of Karen standing there on her porch, smug and unflinching after their confrontation. He knew it wasn't over, that she wouldn't just back down and admit she'd crossed a line. And sure enough, his suspicions were confirmed when a thick envelope appeared on his doorstep one afternoon, its contents more damning than he could have ever anticipated. He ripped open the envelope, his hands trembling as he pulled out a thick stack of papers. His eyes scanned the first page quickly, his stomach sinking as he read the bolded words. Defendant, Jake Collins. Plaintiff, Karen Holloway. The page blurred in front of him as his eyes darted down further. Lawsuit filed for unauthorized interference in property development. Jake's blood ran cold. A knot tightened in his chest. Karen had filed a lawsuit against him. His mind raced as he skimmed the document. She was claiming that he had given her explicit permission to build the cottages, that they had verbally agreed to the project, and that it was his idea in the first place. The audacity of it was almost laughable. Karen was spinning a completely fabricated story, one that had no basis in reality. Yet there it was, in black and white, signed by her attorney. He dropped the papers, pacing back and forth, his heart pounding. How could she do this? How could she lie so convincingly, twisting the truth to her advantage? But the worst part wasn't the lie. It was the fact that the legal system would now be involved. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute. This was going to cost him money, time, and energy he didn't have to spare. As if on cue, his phone buzzed on the counter. The name on the screen made his stomach drop. Karen Holloway. He ignored the call, but it was followed by a voicemail. He pressed play, his finger hovering over the button as he listened to her sickeningly calm voice. Jake, it's Karen. I've gone ahead and filed the papers. I think you'll find that I'm in a position of power now. This is my property as much as it's yours. I'm not backing down, and neither should you. If you want to make this easier on yourself, I suggest you start thinking about how you want to settle this. I'd hate to drag this into court, but if that's what it takes. There was a pause. Consider this a warning, Jake. This is just the beginning. The message ended with an almost cheerful click, as if she'd just given him a friendly reminder. But the venom in her voice was unmistakable. Jake dropped the phone onto the kitchen table, his mind spinning. He wasn't just fighting for his land now. He was fighting for his future. And Karen had just played her hand. He sat down heavily in a chair, running a hand through his hair. This was bad. This was worse than bad. Karen wasn't just playing the victim. She was turning the whole situation on its head, making him out to be the bad guy, the one who had wronged her. And if he didn't act fast, he could lose everything. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. His brother, Sam, stepped inside, a concerned look on his face. "You all right, man?" Sam asked, eyeing the stack of papers on the table. "What's going on?" Jake sighed, rubbing his eyes. "Karen's suing me. She's claiming I gave her permission to build those cottages." Sam's brow furrowed. "What? That's insane. She's lying. You never gave her permission." "I know," Jake muttered, his voice low. "But it doesn't matter. She's got a lawyer, she's got the paperwork, and now I'm the one who looks like the bad guy." Sam shook his head. "You can fight this. You've got the truth on your side." Jake stared at the papers again. But doubt crept in, gnawing at the back of his mind. Could he win? Was this something that could be easily undone? Or had Karen already thought of everything? As the weight of the situation pressed down on him, Jake realized something. This wasn't just a fight for his land. This was a battle for control over his life, and Karen wasn't going to let go without a fight. And deep down, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's next move would be even more dangerous than anything he'd faced so far. Jake couldn't sit idly by any longer. Karen had made her move, and now it was time for him to fight back. His stomach churned with a mix of anger and determination as he sat at his kitchen table, the lawsuit papers still scattered before him. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the surge of adrenaline that had been coursing through him since the legal threats started. He knew that if he didn't act fast, he'd lose everything. It was time to dig deeper. He called a lawyer, one with a reputation for handling real estate disputes, and explained the situation. The lawyer, a gruff man named Richard, agreed to take on the case but warned Jake that this was going to be a tough one. "You're up against someone who's clearly got a lot of nerve," Richard had said, his voice gravelly over the phone. "But we'll fight it. We'll find a way to prove she's lying." The first step was to get documentation. Jake had already checked his own files, but everything was in order. His land was clearly marked as his. No permits, no construction approval for Karen's cottages. But as he drove around the property that afternoon, taking in the sight of the cottages nestled on his land, a gnawing suspicion started to settle in. What if Karen had forged something? What if she had made it look like she had the right to build? The more he thought about it, the more the idea haunted him. He needed to find the truth, and fast. Jake spent the next few days combing through county records, visiting local offices, and even talking to people who had been in the area long before Karen had moved in. A few old-timers at the local diner remembered Karen as someone who always found a way to make things go her way, no matter the cost. A neighbor, Mrs. Harper, had even mentioned seeing Karen bringing in construction crews months ago. It seemed like everyone knew, except for Jake himself. But it wasn't until Jake visited the town hall that he hit the jackpot. He found a copy of a building permit for the cottages, one that had been approved by the county. At least, that's what the permit looked like. But as Jake stared at the document, something didn't sit right. The ink looked fresh, almost too fresh, and the signature on it was off. It didn't match the signature of the county official who was supposed to have authorized it. "Damn it," Jake muttered, clenching his fists. She'd forged it. His heart pounded in his chest. He'd found the smoking gun. But just as he was about to make copies of the permit, something even more disturbing caught his eye. There was a series of emails printed out at the bottom of the stack. They were between Karen and a local contractor, discussing the final touches on the cottages. Jake's blood ran cold. The emails were dated a week before the lawsuit was filed. He quickly scanned them. The contractor was confirming that Karen had received payment in full for the project, with no mention of any legal red tape. It was clear that she knew what she was doing, and she wasn't about to let the law get in her way. Before Jake could gather all his thoughts, his phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from an unknown number. "I know what you're doing. Be careful. Karen is more dangerous than you think." The message sent a shiver down his spine. He stared at it for a long time, his mind racing. Who could have sent this? Was it a warning? Or was it a threat? The truth was out there, but it was buried beneath layers of deception. Jake was getting closer, but the more he uncovered, the more it seemed like someone was trying to keep him from the truth. His eyes narrowed as he looked at the permit again. Karen had covered her tracks, but she'd left one crucial mistake. One mistake that was about to unravel everything. He wasn't just fighting for his property anymore. He was fighting to survive. Jake sat in his truck, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled force. The wind outside howled against the windows, but inside, the silence was deafening. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat, a reminder of the text message he'd received earlier. "I know what you're doing. Be careful. Karen is more dangerous than you think." He hadn't told anyone about it yet, not even Richard, his lawyer, but he had a hunch, a nagging feeling at the back of his mind that something wasn't right. Karen's scam. It wasn't just about the cottages. There had to be more. Jake's gut instincts had always been sharp, and now they were screaming at him. He glanced at the stack of documents on the passenger seat. Building permits, emails, photos, and blueprints of the cottages. He had all the evidence to nail Karen to the wall. But something in those emails was still eating at him. He hadn't fully digested them, but one thing stood out. One name kept appearing in the emails. The name of a company, Harper Realty, Jake's brow furrowed. He knew the name. It was a shady real estate firm, one that had recently been under investigation for illegal rental practices. In fact, the firm was suspected of laundering money through illegal short-term rentals in the area. Jake had heard rumors about them, whispers that they were operating on both sides of the law. It was big, dangerous, and ugly. But it was also a piece of the puzzle Jake had never considered. What if Karen wasn't just a rogue neighbor? What if she was playing a much larger game? Without wasting another second, Jake drove straight to the address he had found for Harper Realty, a run-down building near the outskirts of town. The kind of place no one would ever look twice at, yet it reeked of secrets. He pulled into the cracked parking lot, scanning the area. His instincts told him this was the right place, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. He entered the building, a feeling of unease growing with every step. The place was a labyrinth of narrow hallways and dusty old offices. As he passed an open door, he caught a glimpse of something that made his heart stop. Two men in suits, talking in hushed voices. One of them was familiar. It was the contractor who had built the cottages on his property. Jake froze. "What the hell?" He took a step back, quietly retreating down the hallway, but his foot kicked a loose metal can. It clattered to the floor with an echo that seemed to reverberate through the building. The two men turned, their eyes locking onto Jake for a split second before they vanished into another room. He had been spotted. His stomach churned with the realization that he was in too deep now. But he couldn't back out. Not now. Jake turned on his heel and bolted out the back door, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He didn't have all the pieces yet, but what he had uncovered confirmed it. Karen wasn't just building cottages. She was laundering money, using illegal rentals as a cover for something far more sinister. And the deeper he dug, the more he realized that Karen's scheme had tentacles that reached far beyond the cottages on his land. This was bigger than anything he had imagined, and he wasn't going to stop until he brought it all crashing down. But the stakes had just been raised. The game had changed, and Jake was now up against far more dangerous forces than he ever anticipated. As he sped away, the feeling of being watched intensified. His mind raced. Was he already too late to stop her? Or had he just stumbled upon something that would change everything? Only one thing was certain. Karen had more to hide than anyone could have guessed, and Jake was about to expose it all. The courtroom buzzed with the tension of an impending storm. Jake stood at the edge of the witness stand, his hands gripping the sides for support. The air was thick with anticipation. Today was the day, the final confrontation. Everything had led to this moment. The evidence was stacked high in his favor, but Karen had a reputation for playing dirty. No one could predict how this would end. Across from him, Karen sat with her lawyer, an impeccably groomed man in a sharp suit. She wore her usual smug expression, though there was something in her eyes now, something different. A hint of desperation. It was subtle, but Jake noticed. She had underestimated him, but that had always been her mistake. "Mr. Foster," the judge's voice echoed, drawing Jake's attention back to the front. "You may present your case." Jake took a deep breath. He had prepared for this moment for weeks, but the weight of the situation still pressed on him. He was fighting for more than just his property. This was about exposing a criminal scheme that had been festering for far too long. "Your Honor, what we have here is clear evidence of unlawful construction and illegal rental activity. These cottages were built on my land without my consent," Jake began, his voice steady, despite the adrenaline surging through him. He laid down the stack of documents, the photos, and the testimonies from witnesses. "Karen West has not only trespassed, but has been involved in an organized effort to illegally profit off of my property." Karen's lawyer jumped to his feet, an exaggerated scoff on his lips. "Objection, Your Honor. This is all speculation. Mr. Foster has no real proof that these cottages were built without permission." Jake's heart skipped a beat, but he kept his composure. He knew this was coming. Karen wasn't going to go down without a fight. "Objection overruled," the judge replied curtly, glancing toward Jake's lawyer. As Jake turned back to the courtroom, he caught sight of Karen's cold smile. She was trying to play the victim, manipulating the system. But what she didn't know was that Jake had found something else. A recording of one of Karen's phone calls with the contractor. In the recording, she clearly admitted to the illegal construction and attempted bribery to cover her tracks. "Your Honor," Jake said, pulling out his phone, "I'd like to present a piece of evidence that changes everything." He pressed play. The courtroom fell into a tense silence as Karen's voice echoed through the room, unmistakable in its arrogance. "I don't care what it takes. Just get those cottages up and running." Karen's voice came through the speakers, her words laced with a dangerous certainty. "If anyone questions it, we'll pay them off. No one will know the difference." Jake's breath caught in his throat as he watched Karen's face turn pale. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in the entire ordeal, Jake saw her falter. "Your Honor?" he continued, his voice gaining strength. "This is proof that Karen West has been running an illegal rental operation under false pretenses." Karen's lawyer opened his mouth to protest, but Karen shot him a look that silenced him instantly. She was unraveling, her tightly controlled facade cracking in front of everyone. Jake's pulse raced as the weight of the situation began to settle in. He had her. But just as the judge prepared to make his ruling, Karen stood abruptly. "This isn't over," she spat, her voice low and menacing. "You think you've won? I'll make sure you regret this. You'll never see the last of me." Jake's heart sank. He had exposed the truth, but Karen wasn't done yet. There was still more to come, more manipulation, more threats. But for now, the victory was his. He had the truth on his side, and he wasn't going to let her take that away. As the judge called for a short recess, Jake stepped back, his mind racing. The war was far from over. This was just the beginning. The courtroom was dead silent, the weight of the final judgment pressing down on everyone. Jake felt as though the clock had stopped ticking, every second stretching into eternity. His heart raced in his chest as the judge leaned forward, flipping through the pages of evidence one last time. Karen's once confident posture was now crumbling. Her lawyer's face had drained of color, and she couldn't hide the tremor in her hands as she gripped the edge of the table. There was no denying it now. Jake had won. "Mr. Foster," the judge's voice broke the stillness, and the room fell into a tense hush. "After careful review of the evidence presented, it is clear that the defendant, Karen West, has not only built these cottages illegally but has also engaged in fraudulent activities that violate several laws, including zoning and tenant safety regulations." Jake's mind raced back to the moment he uncovered the final piece of evidence, the phone call that had sealed Karen's fate. She had thought she was untouchable, but she had underestimated him. His meticulous digging, his willingness to fight back, had paid off. The judge continued, his words cutting through the room like a blade. You will be required to demolish the cottages immediately and pay full restitution to the plaintiff for damages, as well as face further legal consequences for your unlawful actions. Jake's pulse surged. He wanted to cheer, to shout with relief, but he held back, letting the quiet satisfaction wash over him. Justice had been served. Karen stood abruptly, her face a mask of fury. She looked like a cornered animal, desperate to escape, but there was nowhere left to hide. "This isn't over," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "You'll regret this. You think you've won? You're just getting started." Jake barely flinched, his gaze unwavering. Her threats were empty now. He had taken everything she had thrown at him, and he had come out on top. She could bluster and lie all she wanted, but the truth was out. The cottages would be torn down, the illegal tenants evicted, and Karen would pay for her fraud. As Karen stormed out of the courtroom, Jake's lawyer patted him on the back. "You did it, Jake. It's over." Jake stood, the weight of the last few months lifting from his shoulders. The fight had been long, but it had been worth it. The relief surged through him like a wave crashing onto shore, and he finally allowed himself a smile. He had won. But as he walked out of the courtroom, something caught his eye. A reporter outside, snapping pictures, the camera's lens focusing on him. The public would know the truth now. Karen's empire of lies was crumbling, and the world would see the real story. Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his lawyer. "Karen's assets are frozen. Criminal charges are being filed. She'll be held accountable." A deep breath of satisfaction escaped his lungs as he glanced at the courthouse steps. The legal battle was over, but he knew this moment was just the beginning of a much larger victory. Justice had prevailed. Karen had been caught, and there was no escape from the consequences of her actions. As Jake walked away, the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the horizon. It was over, and it felt like the first real moment of peace he had in months. But deep down, Jake knew one thing for sure. He'd never stop fighting for what was right, and he'd always be ready for whatever came next. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.